All right, well, welcome and thank you everybody for joining us for today's seminar. I'm Lizzie, the Research Project Manager at C2 Smarter, a USDOT Tier 1 University Transportation Research Center. Today we are joined by Dr. Reuben Tamakloe, a Research Assistant Professor from KAIST, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, to present leveraging AI to improve safety for personal mobility device users. Dr. Tamakloe is a research assistant professor at the CCS Graduate School of Mobility at KAIST, and he earned his PhD in transportation engineering from the University of Seoul and holds a BSc in statistics with mathematics from the University of Ghana. His research focuses on devising ways to improve the safety of vulnerable road users and developing efficient and sustainable transportation modes in cities using econometric and machine learning techniques. And as always, we will be recording the seminar and uploading it to our YouTube channel. And we encourage everybody to ask questions. And if you're joining online, you can do so by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, and I will read out your question at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will hand things over to our presenter to get us started.
Oh, great. Thanks a lot, Ms. O, for the great introduction. Again, my name is Reuben, and I'm at KAIST. I'm a research professor there doing lots of research in terms of safety. Today, I'm really happy to be here with you and very thankful to the team for inviting me to give this talk. Specifically, I want to discuss ways and means by which we use AVs to what is it? AI, basically, to help to improve the safety of people who are using personal mobility devices. This is actually a set of research that we have conducted, but at KAIST. 3 research studies that I'll be discussing with you here today. How many of us use personal mobility devices on a day-to-day basis? Okay, great. Professor uses one. And when I talk about personal mobility devices here, I want to focus more on e-scooters, okay, because that's where we get a lot of data from. So, like I mentioned, I think I have a challenge with this. It's not moving. So, like I mentioned, we'll be looking at 3 different studies. First of all, we will look at PMD-involved crash types. We want to understand the crash types that are occurring, and also trying to look at their characteristics. I also look at how we are looking at improving the safer streets for PMD users, and also trying to put vehicle drivers in the shoes of PMD users, and seeing how they feel, especially if they interact, using some simulation devices. So moving on throughout the whole study, I'll first look at the background for each of the studies that I'm going to present on, the background, the novelty, the methodology throughout the conclusion. So this study that I'm about to discuss here was published in AAP quite recently. And in this study, basically, I want to look at the characteristics of PMD crashes in South Korea and understand how we can, improve upon their safety, PMD users. So PMD officially came into the system in South Korea not quite long ago. And then, like I mentioned, if I talk about PMD, I'm focusing much on e-scooters. In South Korea, the traffic accident department started collecting accidents on PMD, involving PMDs since 2017. And if you can see the trajectory, the number of crashes have been soaring up. That's the blue one. And then the fatalities, you see, is so close to that. But getting to 2019, this started increasing. And in 2021, it's up there. So this is becoming a problem. Many people want to ride these devices, makes them able to move from one place to another so quickly. However, the problem is these devices are associated with a lot of fatalities. So then we need to understand what is causing these crashes, what's their characteristics, and seeing how we can make the life of these guys more safer. So I went into the literature, tried to understand what is happening in terms of PMD accident analysis. And I understood that many of the studies have looked at some of the risky behaviors that these PMD riders usually take part in, the environmental factors associated with these crashes involving PMD riders. People have also looked at alcohol and drug use, the influence of this on PMD safety, and then other factors, demographic factors, like we know mostly males are usually associated with more fatalities. These we usually know. And then when we look at some of the factors influencing injury severity for these guys, many people have looked at the association between different times of day, the road conditions, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, there are some kind of gaps that I identified. There is usually a lack of research focusing on the PMD at fault crashes. Okay, I identified that most of the crashes that were occurring were caused by the PMD riders, which was really interesting in that of South Korea. So I was really curious, what are the factors influencing these crashes? How are these crashes even like looking at, if we look at it on a broader scale? And then how can we mitigate these kind of crashes in terms of their injury severity outcomes? Now, also, I noticed that people have not really looked at these crashes, like I mentioned, trying to understand what are the various types of crashes, what are the unique factors associated with these types of PMD crashes occurring in South Korea. So this study basically wanted to understand these crashes and find out how to improve upon the lives of the riders. So basically we had obtained this crash data set. We performed a clustering analysis using a cluster correspondence analysis. The most important feature of this method is that it takes the whole data set, it finds homogeneous clusters, and also tries to identify the features that are really associated with all of these crashes specifically. So for each homogeneous group we identify, what are the unique features associated with these crashes in those homogeneous groups? And then basically we explain the results, and then we find policy measures that can be used in terms of policy making. So this study, as I mentioned, was conducted in South Korea. Okay, South Korea is one very nice place to live in. I think I've discussed this with a lot of you. And then specifically this study is focused in Seoul. Seoul is one of the most densiest cities in South Korea. And many people are beginning to use e-scooters and these PMD devices. Problem, like I mentioned before, these crashes are becoming so common, but we don't really understand what type of crashes are occurring. What are the factors influencing injury severities of these crashes? So specifically, I obtained this crash data set, which contains a lot of variables, the temporal and environmental factors, the roadway design information and all that, and then the PM user characteristics, those at fault. And basically this data span from 2017 to 2021, and we obtained about 982 usable data sets for the analysis, observations for the analysis. So after running the cluster correspondence analysis, we identified three main clusters per se. And these clusters, looking at the factors that are associated with the clusters, I named all of these crashes. And actually, there was one interesting thing that I identified. So basically, what the CCA approach does is that it identifies unique homogeneous clusters, and it shows you what are the critical factors influencing injury severity in each of the clusters. So when we look at the first cluster, we can see that the variables on one particular side, on the left side, are the factors that are not associated with this cluster. Those on the right side are associated with that particular cluster. When we look at those variables on the right-hand side, we identify that these crashes in cluster 1 are likely to be PMD and vehicle-related crashes. And for the cluster 2, we identify that these are likely to be PMD and pedestrian-related crashes. And then for cluster 3, these are likely to be single PMD crashes. And bear in mind, this data set involves PMD user at fault crashes. So then, I identify some of the unique factors that I put over here associated with each of the clusters. For all of the clusters, I identified that most of the crashes were likely to occur in intersections. Fatal crashes were likely to occur at intersections. They involved the males riding these PMD devices. They were likely to occur during the daytime and during the autumn season of the year, and also during the weekday. Mostly people are riding these to wherever they want to go. And when it comes to the PMD and vehicle crashes, these were the at-fault body parts. Mostly the person riding the PMD usually gets hurt. When he gets hurt, on his leg, usually between the ages of 56 to 65, and also occurring during the afternoon periods. These crashes are likely to be fatal that's when a PMD and vehicle involved crash occurs. On the other side, for cluster 2, which is PMD and pedestrian crashes, we can also see the associated factors that are linked with injury severities. And the single vehicle, or let me say per se, or single PMD crashes, we can see that mostly they are caused by or associated with failure to observe safety driving rules. So basically, we identify some of the key takeaways. Yes?
So when you say failure to drive safely, you mean on the part of the PMD?
Of the PMD, yeah. Because in a way, in South Korea, we categorize PMDs also as vehicles. So sometimes you may see driving and then, yes. So we identify some of the key takeaways, specifically based on what are the critical factors associated with each particular homogeneous group. And we think that prioritizing rider education is likely going to be very necessary because these guys are usually at fault. This was actually very interesting to me because I expected that they were supposed to be usually not at fault of these crashes, but they were mostly at fault of the crashes. Very interesting. So that's why I analyzed and got this study out. Next study, I want to look at towards making the streets more safer for PMD riders. And over here, I do some analysis to identify how built environment factors also come in when it comes to injury severity analysis of these PMD users. So, we all know, many studies or researchers always talk about the influence of built environment factors, influencing so many facets of our lives. People have done influence of built environment factors on maybe things like maybe ridership of public transport and so on and so forth. So one key question was, how does the built environment factor also influence injury severity outcomes in terms of traffic safety? So like I mentioned, most of these studies have been done when it comes to other aspects of our lives. When it comes to vehicle crashes and built environment factors, people have analyzed these. People have also looked at pedestrian crash frequency and injury severity. People have analyzed all of this. Crash risk at school zones, and so on and so forth. But what is it that we do not know yet? Mostly, like I mentioned, people look at built environment factors on a more broader scale. Things like how many, maybe things related to the built environment that we can all see. Okay, but how about some of the micro scale level stuff that are actually very difficult to capture? For example, the proportion of the sky in some particular place. When we want to look at built environment, for instance, we can look at it in the sense of the mesoscale. We can also look at it in terms of the micro scale. Okay, and the main problem of most of the researchers is that they usually look at the mesoscale, which is quite larger. But the microscale features are also really important, particularly when we want to look at things like walkability and so on and so forth. So then I was curious about identifying how these things could also impact injury severity and for the PMD users. So that was the key motivation of this study. So how is this particular study done? So I also obtained the traditional crash data, which is provided in online by South Korea. And I also looked at, for each of the crash observations, I took their XY coordinates. Then I can locate exactly where the crashes have occurred. So after identifying these locations, I extract Google Street View information. That's a 360 view of the location where the crash has occurred. And using some deep learning tools, I can extract the microscale built environment features and use that for analysis and identify how they influence injury severities. Yes?
So as far as the crash location coordinates, how precise are those?
Okay. So in South Korea, what happens, or basically in terms of accident, data collection, once the crash occurs, I'm speaking for the South Korean case, okay, they send out police and then the safety experts, they go there, they mark the locations, they pick up the coordinates and all factors associated with the crash. So, for example, who is involved in the crash? Is it a male or a female? Is it how old was this person? And all the information. So, based on the data coming from the police, we can trust that it's actually going to be precise.
So they tell you, okay, this occurred like 5 centimeters from the edge of the sidewalk.
Yes, we can get all of that information. Yes. So after collecting that, I use Google Street View, and then I extract the information, and then I process, and then get some outcome from the study. Yes, ask me.
And how do you deal with the inconsistency in the Google Street View? Let's say some street block, or maybe they took the picture in 1 year, some might be older.
Okay, yes. So what we did was, in this crash data set, for instance, we have, from 2017 to 2021. So that's a very good question. Things get updated as time goes on. But certain things are not, do not really change. Okay, for example, the road diameter, it do not really change with time. So what we did was, these kind of images can be called for different time periods. Yeah, so we tried as much as possible to make sure that it aligns with the time that we are actually working with. Yes. Any more questions? Okay, then we move on. So, getting this information, like I mentioned, we used Google Street View. South Korea also has their own kind of streets, anytime we are moving from one place, we have our own maps. Okay, so once we don't get information from here, because sometimes some of the images are not available, so we can consult those, platforms too in South Korea. So what we do is we mark the location of the crashes. I think the light, okay, not working well. We mark the location of the crashes, as you can see here. Then we have this kind of perimeter where we collect all this information from. So after we collect this information, we process it and use it for analysis. So basically, we're also using the 5-year data set for this study. So we collect the GSV, Google Street View images. We use this advanced deep learning model to do semantic segmentation. And then we can obtain each of the features that are in the images that were obtained. So I provided an example of that image here. So if you look at this, we take this whole 360 degree image, okay? Then we can segment each of these into various microscale built environment features. For example, we can identify what's the proportion of greenery or the trees in this particular image, the proportion of the road, proportion of buildings, and so on and so forth. Then we get this information, we attach it to the traditional data set that we have, and then we use it for analysis. I don't know if there's any question from here. Okay. So, the data set or the variables that were considered. Initially, we focused on using the target variable, specifying the target variable as the injury severity variable, where we classify it as 0 and 1. So we have 1 as fatal and severe, 0 as minor injury. Then we have various traditional crash variables, attaching it with the micro-scale built environment features. So then we analyze this using this publicly available tool called AutoGloon. Basically what this does is that it provides this kind of platform where you only provide it with the data, then after running the model, it automatically determines what is the best technique to apply. So it identifies this and tells you, does all this hyperparameter tuning and all that. Then once you identify the best model to apply, we use this model and then we interpret it using SHARP, which I'm sure you are conversant with. So then once we get the SHARP feature importance, we plot this and then we try to look at it to understand exactly what features are influencing injury severity outcomes in the model. So from this data set, we identified that 21 very key features were really contributing much when it comes to the injury severity predictions. Now we can see that most of these features, one of them is the passenger car. When a passenger car is involved in this crash, it's likely to increase injury severity outcomes. And a failure to observe safe driving, as we identified in the previous study, and so on and so forth. We can also see some of the built environment features also in the plots. Now I try to use Shapley to understand, how each variable is actually influencing injury severity outcomes. So in this slide, we can see how to explain these results. So this particular variable is the time of crash. So we can see for each row is the time of the crash. This should be midnight, 5 a.m. up onto midnight again. 24, 23 is at the end. So the red points are likely going to be the at-fault party being the PMD user. And the blue ones are likely to be the not at fault. And in this prediction, we are looking at injury severity outcomes, not the crash frequency. Earlier on, I mentioned that when it comes to crash frequency, most of the crashes are caused by the PMD guys. But from this plot, what we can see is that, as you can see, most of the reds are below. And that means that most of the injury, fatal crashes are likely to be caused by the non-at-fault, PMD. Let me say the other driver, vehicle driver, who is involved in the crash. And one key thing that we can identify over here is that the time window between 3 to 8 is the period where very severe crashes are likely to occur. And interestingly, in this particular time window, it doesn't really matter whether the PMD user is at fault or not at fault. Majority of these crashes are likely going to be fatal crashes. And maybe I did not mention, but then each dot, like I already put here, each point is likely to be each observation in the crash data set. So one advantage of using these kind of non-linear relationship plots is that we can identify clearly some of the non-linear relationships, okay, and identify exactly which window fatal crashes are likely going to occur. And then we can actually do some adjustments to policies to check these kind of severity outcomes from occurring. So I put a lot of figures over here so that we can see clearly how built environment specifically is influencing injury severity outcomes in terms of PMD users. One key thing we can see is that actually it looks like there's a reducing kind of trend coming down, negative relationship when it comes to the wall proportion. When I talk about wall proportion, sometimes, whenever there's a road, sometimes you can have a lot of walls at the other side, maybe of the buildings, some buildings being walled. Okay, so if the street has some walls on those particular sides, likely from this, we can see that majority of the streets did not have very high proportion of walls, okay, which is quite, logical, because most of the streets do not have that. And one thing we can see is that for those streets that do not have much of the walls on the both sides of the roads, they are likely to be associated with increased injury severity outcomes. So not having walls on the other two sides of the road is an indicator of openness. The place is very open. So many people, and these roads are likely to be very high speed roads, not urban centers where people are actually going to be transacting a lot of stuff. When we look at this next image, for instance, we can also see that low terrain proportion areas are also likely to be associated with injury severity outcomes, increased injury severity outcomes, actually also caused by the vehicle drivers that are involved. And another thing we can identify here is that as the sidewalk proportion is increasing, the fatality rate is likely to be increasing, which is kind of very interesting, especially for those in the US. One thing is that over here in the US, you guys don't ride in the sidewalks, right? But in South Korea, even though there's a policy to preventing them from riding, people always ride in the sidewalks. So as you can see, with the sidewalks proportion increasing, fatality rates are increasing, which could be very, very logical in the sense of the South Korea's case.
Sorry, could you explain that? So the sidewalk proportion of the road, so
Yes.
you have a larger sidewalk.
Larger.
And so they're going, and then you're saying it increases
Increasing.
the probability that they're going to get in a collision with the car.
No. This could be either car or pedestrian, or even another PMD. In this particular study, we did not segregate, we did not do that for different, maybe PMD car, PMD rider, maybe PMD pedestrian.
So what do you think is the mechanism at play here?
Pardon?
What do you think is the mechanism?
Okay. Yes, very, very good question. So when we look at the psychology of the riders, okay, I'm just, trying to think out loud. So the proportion is increasing. Okay, people are walking in these sidewalks. As the proportion is increasing, the rider can feel very confident or even feel more safer. And it increases his tendency of, partaking in very, very risky behaviors, mostly. Because if I'm riding and it's very, very large, then I want to speed more on the sidewalks. And there's a high chance that I can get involved in an accident with another person. However, if the sidewalk is very, very, slim, I may feel, I need to ride more carefully because I'm going to encounter some pedestrians. Okay, so basically, I think that's what's at play over here.
Does the proportion of sidewalk also correlate with the density of people in the area?
Okay, that is something that I haven't looked at. I think that it will be very interesting to look at how it correlates with the density of the people, and then maybe we can understand the results much more better.
Especially because you mentioned also it happens a lot in the evening, right?
Yes, sure. So in the evening, many people want to walk.
They're walking,
And
going
then-
to restaurants.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly. I don't know, yes.
So these are like the post incidental factors, right? And also the static factors that you're looking for. So how about any dynamic factors like right before the incident happened, what is
Okay.
like the vehicle patterns, go into the incidental location, right?
Yes.
And also what is the weather condition that is associated with it. So, it's a raining day, it will be like either visibility for
Yes.
impaired by both the PMD drivers and also the vehicle drivers.
Yes.
Are you consider that also into this analysis?
Actually, this analysis does not consider that. But in the future, it's something that we are really interested in working on. So we are looking at getting video data from these CCTVs and analyzing them, time to collision and all those kind of things. It's something we really want to look at. Yes. Any more questions, please? So moving on, I also created another slide, showing how the fence proportion, sometimes we have these fences guiding, or protecting people from jumping onto the main road and all that. And then how shared bike route length and so on and so forth, influences injury severity outcomes in these places. So the key thing in these slides is that it shows us exactly where and when we can try to reduce these injury severity outcomes. For example, if I look at sidewalk proportion, we talked a lot about this, from maybe 0 to something about just a little bit inside here, we don't really need to do much because these crashes are associated with low injury severity outcomes. But if we look at those places that have very high injury severity outcomes, we can see from in terms of the proportion. Then one thing this can, inform is that we can actually identify these risky places and then try and educate those people who use those roads very, very often. In terms of the wall proportion too, we don't really need to do much in places that have very high wall proportions. But those places that do not have much, I think they are high-speed locations. We need to give a lot of advice to these riders on how to use those particular locations. So that's what this particular analysis can help us to identify. And then we can actually try to solve the safety issue of the PMD users more directly. So moving on, what we want to do is to try to calculate streetscape perception, indices. Basically, we have already identified this, but then the next step is to identify how this influences injury severity outcomes. For example, how open the place is. I already mentioned an indicator for openness. If the road is very open, how are these injury severity outcomes, playing in those particular locations? If the streets are highly walkable, how are the injury severity outcomes turning up over there? Then when we have a lot of enclosure in terms of the fence that I mentioned. So basically, that's the next step of this study, and then it should be, we plan to submit this for publication. So I think I have already talked a little bit about this, so then I'll move on to the next study. In the next study, like I mentioned from the first and then the second study, some of the crashes are mostly, in terms of injury severity. High injury severity crashes are likely to be caused by the vehicle drivers. So this study was going to try to understand how drivers feel when they are interacting with pedestrians or other VRU users on the streets. I know most of us drive, right? So the question is, how do you feel when you are driving and you meet another VRU or a scooter rider in the street? Or maybe you are riding a bicycle and then a vehicle is passing by. How do you feel? Do you feel threatened or you feel safe in US? I don't know. Anyone?
You say in the shoes of the driver or in the shoes of the PMD user?
Both of them.
As a driver, I'm annoyed.
As a driver, I'm sure you will not be scared.
I'm annoyed.
You are annoyed. Exactly. That's one thing that influenced this study. Okay, most of the drivers, we identified that they are usually annoyed by how the PMD users are operating on the road. The drivers feel the road is for them. They don't want to share it with anyone. Okay, but how do the PMD riders also feel? Who has ever ridden a bicycle? Fanush.
Unsafe.
Unsafe. Yeah. Even I will feel much safer in US because you guys have protected lanes and all that. In South Korea, they are protected, but we don't usually have these barriers. Okay, so it's like, I don't know how you guys call it here, but it's not fully protected. Okay, the protected ones are usually at maybe the river bank. Okay, you don't have much of the interaction with other vehicles. So that was one of the things that this study actually wanted to look at. So we did some simulator analysis, and then we submitted it, which is almost published in AAP2. So, like I mentioned, we really, always think the PMD riders are usually doing very crazy things on the road. So as a driver, you are angry, these people are also, trying to use the road with you. However, the PMD guys also think differently. Okay, so that's actually the motivation of this study. So we wanted to understand how these people think, and also how we can try to put both of them on the road together. Okay, so I will just speak because I think we already understand what's going on here. So the research objective just to try to improve road safety by trying to understand how each parties feel and how they are going to be reacting. If they actually experience their own driving style while being a PMD rider. So we'll be performing a simulator analysis, we'll be performing also a survey, then we get their mindsets, and then we explain that. So in this study, we did a virtual driving simulation. What we did was we tried to have a vehicle overtake an e-scooter rider. So as he's overtaking, we record his trajectory, everything that he's doing, the distance between the vehicle and then the lateral distance, and so on and so forth. And then after this, we replay the overtaking behavior to the driver whilst he's riding the e-scooter. And all this replaying stuff is done in Unity. Unity provides this kind of platform where you can actually do those kind of multiple simulator stuff and identify how people really feel. So this is what we did in our lab. Like as you can see, there's this student, riding the e-scooter simulator, and the same student will drive the vehicle. Okay, we replay his driving behavior to him, and actually we kind of lied to the person performing the experiment that the researchers are going to be driving the car. Okay, so we just want to know how you are going to ride this and how to know how you are going to ride that one too. But actually, it was his own driving behavior that he experienced. And then we try to understand how he feels in both shoes. So that was what this study was about. So this is just an explanation of all what I have said. So in the analysis, we try to measure so many stuff: the speed of the vehicle, the speed of the e-scooter. We also measure the longitudinal distance and the lateral distance, and so on and so forth. And we try to put these into, like, visualize the results. Interestingly, like we already said, the vehicle drivers always feel safe. They said, oh, we feel safe when we are driving by the e-scooter guys. Only 7% were really not safe. The e-scooter guys, interestingly, it was split half. Some said, oh, I really feel safe. 50% were like, no, I really don't feel safe when using the roads, when being overtaken by the driver. And bear in mind, these people, they are the same people that were driving the vehicles, okay? And the same people who were riding the e-scooters too. So we tried to use Mann-Whitney-U test to kind of understand what's happening here in terms of the relative speed. So these are the guys who felt threatened. These are the guys who felt safe. Okay, we kind of grouped them into two after doing the survey. And then we looked at the lateral distance between the vehicles when they were riding and then when they were driving. We also looked at the relative speed and so on and so forth, various variables. Then we identified that there was a significant difference when it comes to the relative speed, but there was no significant difference for lateral distance and so on and so forth. And also we identified another significant difference when it comes to acceleration, which is quite logical, because for the acceleration and the relative speed too. So basically, we also try to understand using some correlation analysis, okay, how these guys try to perceive the driving difference. So for here, also relative lateral distance became quite significant here. So basically, road users kind of perception, we analyzed that here. We identified that as lateral distance is increasing, people are kind of not very they feel as in a little bit, safe. Maybe we have the more distance between them. And that was the only significant relationship we had identified here. So coming, into putting everything together, we identified that the side distance during overtaking is likely to be between, 15%, 15 centimeters. Okay, and these guys within this particular range usually feel threatened when there is that, small space between the vehicle and then the e-scooter. And the guys that usually had negative perceptions usually showed cautious behavior whenever they are overtaken or being overtaken by a vehicle. So specifically, this study was trying to, like I mentioned, understand, okay, trying to put the driver in the shoe of the e-scooter rider and trying to see how they feel, especially finally after they find out that they were actually riding these vehicles. And then we identified that speed, okay, and the distance parameters were key over here. And we identified that if we should move, to like teaching drivers to understand basically how to accommodate these road users, PMD guys, by giving them enough distance while they ride, we will go a long way improving, the safety of PMD riders. So, like I said, if we educate them, we need to, we need also to, accommodate other people when they are using the road spaces. This will go a long way to improve the safety of PMD or vulnerable road users using the streets. I think there's a question.
So, is the overtaking behavior different when a driver is overtaking a PMD versus if they're overtaking a car?
Very, very. Just what we saw, after the analysis. The drivers, mostly when they are overtaking, okay, behavior in terms of the distance, in terms of speed, the speed is usually high. Yeah. So clear difference. And then
How about the lateral distance?
the lateral distance, I think from the results we collected, was not that high, because basically they didn't really care about the PMD riders.
So you're saying the lateral distance in the PMDK versus the lateral distance in another car, so they gave more space to the car.
More space, yeah.
To the car.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, this is the end of the talk. We tried to look at first understanding how the crashes are occurring in terms of the traditional crash data sets that we have. What are the key groups of crashes that are likely to occur? Then we identified the unique features associated with each cluster. In the second study, we looked at how built environment features are likely to influence injury severity outcomes in PMD rider crashes. And specifically, we identified that there are actually non-linear relationships between the built environment factors, the micro-scale built environment factors, and also injury severity outcomes. We identified that if we are able to actually identify which thresholds to actually do maybe some fine-tuning in policy-wise, we can actually improve the safety of PMD riders. In the final study, because we knew that most of the fatal crashes are caused by the vehicle drivers, not the PMD riders, we decided to perform a simulator analysis where we replayed the driver's own driving behavior to them whilst they are riding the e-scooter. So we see how they feel. Okay, so right after that, we perform the study again and see if there's actually a change in their behavior. And putting all this together, we identified that to improve the safety of PMD riders, we have to educate drivers more on how to actually behave when they encounter a PMD rider on the road. So basically, this is the study that was conducted, and I'm really happy that I got the opportunity to share it with you. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
One more question regarding to your third studies. That's really good study. Thank you for showing that. Just like when you guys design the experiments, you have
Yes.
like single driver versus a single PMD driver, right? But I think in the normal cases, right, for the PMD driver itself, it's kind of like experiencing in the fleet along the road, right? Should be like many cars passing by
Yes,
instead
yes.
of one car.
Instead of one car, yes.
So then the perception in terms of the safety awareness should be different.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
And it, like vice versa, for the vehicle driver itself, it's also like experiencing, or it also depends on which lane, right? Usually, like scooter drivers will ride on the rightmost lane.
Yes,
or something
yes,
like
yes.
that. But so then the strategy for the routing and the trajectory itself will also, like what Professor mentioned that. So for the letter distance,
Yeah.
itself can also impact.
Exactly, exactly. So thanks a lot for your question. And we actually got a question of that sort, very, very similar to that during the review. Okay, and actually I'll say that this is the initial kind of study that we are performing, trying to replay. Okay, we haven't seen such in the safety research yet. Okay, so it is very true that all of these factors can influence. But initially, what we did was, in order to try to capture that, we first, put a dummy vehicle. Immediately, the survey begins. A dummy vehicle will first of all pass by, just to give the rider the impression that other vehicles will be coming. Okay, and then now the main vehicle that he drove will play his own behavior to him. Then we see how he's going to react. Okay, so yes, it is true. We can actually put more dummy vehicles just to be moving, and also compare if there are actually changes between this and that one too. And then I think it will make for a very interesting study too. The distances are also things that can also influence. Yeah. Any more questions?
If there aren't any questions in the room, we do have one over Zoom.
Okay.
And just a reminder also, if anybody has any others, please enter now. So they say, first they say, hello, thank you for the presentation. These are really interesting studies. Then I think it's a two-parter. The first is, did the data include some locations where crashes did not happen as a counter of sorts? And then the second is, additionally, how did you separate the effects of the different things, say in a case where the sidewalk is big and there are no traffic lights?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm not so sure about the first question, which study it's actually coming from. But if it's for the second study, which is about the built environment features, basically we collected crash information, maybe the XY coordinates from locations where crashes had occurred. So basically, after extracting the crash data set from the source that we got it from, we just extracted the XY coordinates, which are real places that crashes had previously occurred, and then we use that for the analysis. I don't know if that question has been answered. And the second question, can you please repeat the second question?
Sure. The second piece is, how did you separate the effects of the different things, say in a case where the sidewalk is big and there are no traffic lights? And it was submitted about 5 minutes ago, so it's probably in the latter part of the presentation.
The second question is not very clear to me, but then I think it's about the segmentation approach. But when we look at the segmentation, so basically what we did was, after obtaining the GSV, Google Street View images, we passed them through this segmenting tool, which is a deep learning tool. So basically we can identify exactly what's the proportion of each of the features in the image that we are passing through. So based on this, we can identify the exact proportion of each of the features. I really do not know if this is exactly what the question is about, but in case it has not been answered, maybe the question, maybe we can come again to the question and see how we can answer it much better. Do you have any more questions? Yes.
Maybe they mean when you were looking at the effects of the frequency of crashes and fatal crashes on the sidewalk, or how big the sidewalk is. Maybe they're also, did you you were looking at the sidewalk, the stoplight, etc. Did you look at cases where the sidewalk was big but there was no stoplight?
Okay, we didn't look at that. We didn't look at that.
That was my understanding of maybe what they're.
Okay, yes. If that's the understanding, we didn't look at that. Basically, we worked with the data set that we had collected here. I think it will be great to maybe explore much further so that we can get much answers, and see how we can best improve safety of PMD users. Any more questions? Please feel free to ask me. I know there are a lot of safety guys here. So anyway, so that's the study that I am conducting these days. These are 3 studies that I'm conducting, and I'm very happy to, having been here to share it with you. Yes. Sami, should I have a question? Okay then.
There are no more questions. We can wrap up.
Okay.
Everybody joining and to our presenter for today's webinar. And again, a recording will be available on the center's YouTube channel and on our website. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.